Hello everyone. As Indra mentioned, my name is Jasmine Kinsman. I am a lecturer at the University or Nelson Mandela University. I've been a financial planning lecturer for the last 10 years for both the BCom financial planning as well as the postgrad financial planning programs. And I'm currently doing my PhD with a specific focus on financial planning. And what I wanted to do was sort of reimagine or reconceptualize the financial planning process. Not necessarily because I think that there's something inherently wrong with it, but I think that we need a little bit of a adjustment or relook at how we give financial advice in a South African context, especially because this very same 6-step financial planning process, which is obviously set up by the Financial Planning Standards Board, which is an international, which we know international standard setting body. It was in a very different context than it was in South Africa. We've got 11 official languages. We've got 4 main cultural groups. In the Black African cultural group, we've got so many different ethnicities and subcultures. Even amongst the white population, we've got Afrikaner way of doing things, English way of doing things. Within the colored communities, there's different ways. Even when we speak about religion, which plays such a huge role when it comes to financial planning, there's different ways about even administering our estates and so forth. Even the way we view and perceive wealth is very different. The way retirement is viewed is very different, but yet we seem to be using the standard 6-step financial planning process. And what is interesting is that according to the FBI, to be a certified financial planner and to be considered competent, you need to be able to apply the 6-step financial planning process. But yet we still find a lot of CFP professionals that are actually not really giving advice, but rather, the same old traditional way of giving or selling products and so forth. And I, from an academic point of view, the reason why I looked at the 6-step financial planning process is because obviously you need something to reconceptualize. But I think from a personal perspective, it really hit me because when I studied financial planning, I thought it was one thing, but then it ended up being something completely different. I felt like what's happening in the financial planning industry doesn't reflect my needs, my family's needs, my personal experiences. And that's why I actually appreciate coaching so much, because it really takes a personal reflection. And I've learned a lot from a lot of the financial planners that I've actually spoken to about financial coaching. So if we actually look at the 6-step financial planning process and the way that it's applied, we're assuming that everyone establishes relationships the same way. We're assuming that all the information that we collect about our clients is exactly the same. We're also assuming that the needs are all the same. And a lot of the financial planners that I've spoken to with regards to my study say, yes, the needs are the same. But I think what we forget is that the context in which these different needs are taking place in a cultural context is very different. I found that different cultures will prioritize these needs very differently. Funeral policies, for example, is something that is prioritized in the African culture, whereas maybe in the colored culture or in the white culture, it's not as prioritized. It's not something that's seen as important as it is in the African community, which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But it's just the fact that it's different priorities. Traveling is prioritized by some cultures over other needs. So I think these are things that's important to consider. Retirement, for example, is a very different priority because even in my own culture, sometimes in an African culture, we've got the notion of black tax, and the whole retirement thing is almost seen to be left to the children to sort of sort the parents out. The way wealth is viewed is very forward looking versus backwards looking. A lot of the because in my study I'm chatting to CFPs as well as to consumers, and a lot of the consumers that I've been chatting to in the African culture, the colored culture, wealth is almost seen as something that is backward looking, because we want to take care of our parents. We want to take care of the previous generation. Whereas in other cultures, it's very forward looking, where we want to look after the next generation. And what is so interesting is the fact that there's nothing wrong with any of these notions, but it just becomes a problem when you yourself have a specific way of doing something, a specific way of being trained, and you don't really take these nuances into consideration. Um, even another example, what I found is that um, some Black African consumers seem to use financial planning on a transactional basis. They don't seem to almost have trust in a financial planner, which is obviously an industry specific issue as well. But they don't seem to have trust in a financial planner. They use financial planners almost like doctors, and they go and they seek second opinions. So they don't really get the full benefit of financial planning. And I think that is also because of, again, biases. Um, I've also found that a lot of CFPs and financial planners have been telling me that when it comes to even establishing a relationship or building some sort of trust or just chatting to a potential client, they already are experiencing certain biases because of what they believe about different cultures. In the African culture, older Black females don't really want to listen to um, older Black female clients don't really want to listen to Black CFPs because in their culture, women aren't viewed as equals to males. You will find that also Black African or even sometimes colored clients don't really want a Black financial planner. And these are all findings that I've found so far, which is quite interesting. And it just shows you that all the biases that we all have about different cultures really plays such an impact on the way financial planning advice is received, right? Okay, right. So yeah, that is just some of the findings that I've found. And I think that if we aren't, again, like I said, I come to the forum with more questions than I have answers and solutions. And I think you really need to consider where you are at in terms of not necessarily only your competencies, but your ability to listen and actually suss out information. Because if a client doesn't feel that you might understand their specific need because you might be from a different culture, then you're not going to be able to address that client's needs. Um, for example, we all have different propensities to save. We have, especially because of the way we grew up. Me personally, and I'm a very open person. I come from an educated family. Both my parents are in education. My dad's a psychometrist, educational psychometrist. So we have the education and so forth in the family. But when it came to the financial tools and tasks and things, saving, I didn't learn how to save from my parents. My parents didn't know how to save. Debt management wasn't really something that they knew about. So and this is because in the past, because of South Africa's history, we didn't really have access to this information, didn't have access to the resources, didn't have access to the financial products that we do today. So I think from a financial coaching perspective or from a financial planning perspective, I think you just need to be aware of these things. As far as I can tell for now, so that you can actually adequately address your clients' needs.
Thank you, Jasmine. Yeah, interesting. I think you touched on your last bit is I think the awareness is so important. And I think for both financial planner as well as for the client, because being aware of the impact of that stories on your future and your financial planning, you sit with that paradox, as well as then as financial planner being aware of somebody else's different way of looking at of financial planning. And then I think not being judgmental is then a important part other than just forcing down the advice that you think is appropriate, because that won't work. So yeah, because one question I'm pondering on is the latest research that actually shows that 70% of South Africans have got financial anxiety, or indicated that they've got financial anxiety. Then somewhere there's a way that we need to better engage with people in terms of their finances. And it's not just a South African problem, it's a worldwide problem. But I think there's definitely something that we need to do differently in terms of delivering financial advice. Prince, what would you like to share with us and add to Jasmine's conversation? Because it's, I think she touched on a lot of very important points.
Yes, thank you very much, Hendrik. Thank you, colleagues, for having me. I think what I believe is that for the very longest time, we got off on the wrong foot in the whole establishment of financial planning as a profession. In that we borrowed a lot from studies that have been done within the broader finance and investment research, and so words like biases and then heuristics were very looked upon negatively, but biases in a way are just a way of making a sense of our world with so much information. And I suppose if we were to have started off on the foot that we do not look at biases from a negative perspective, it probably could have done a lot of help to the industry. And I think that is where maybe we should start looking at it in a way to say these biases are just ways of life that we've lived. We've learned to adjust over thousands of years on these biases, so they are not necessarily something negative. And then also, when we started classifying people's financial behaviors as rational and irrational, it subconsciously already starts to push people away from really wanting to seek the help they need, because whichever way I spend my money, for example, I wouldn't want another person to refer to me as irrational. And then funny enough, when I started really looking at all these biases, the 200 plus of them, and critically questioning them, I found that but sometimes what is even deemed rational does not even make sense in the real world, because we don't go around in life doing probabilities in every decision that we take. None of us would pick a pen and paper to work out the probability of whatever decision. And one interesting bias I found out recently was, if you were to be given two options of saying getting 300,000 rands upfront guaranteed versus say 500,000, say an 80% chance of getting 500,000. And then I found that there's no way any person will have time to work out expected values to make a decision, But we go on then to tag rational, irrational, and it has been very unhelpful. But I suppose with the field moving on into coaching and all, we are beginning to realize that maybe we should tone down on the labeling, because it becomes quite problematic. And with that, I think at this point the industry is in the right direction now, with now really considering the individual, because our typical pure financial planning looks at every aspect from a purely individual perspective, and we never considered the societal impact on our decision making. And so as we begin to recognize these, I think it's taken us in the right direction. I had an interesting conversation with one of the guys in the asset management industry, and I asked him, but pretty much all the adverts that you put on TV are still based on the rational individual planning for the long term, but what about the behavior aspect? You're still not capturing it, because when we invest for retirement, for example, none of us, at least not me, is planning to maximize returns. It's more of my fear of being poor when I'm old. So why is nobody looking at these other, behavioral aspects? Sometimes people invest not to maximize returns, but they want the status that comes with the returns. And if I can market an investment product to you based on the status you seek, I could still do you some good in terms of allowing you to benefit from, all the great wonders of financial planning than if I were to speak to you in risk return, long-term compounding, and lose you as a client, because it does nobody any good if we talk about the power of compounding and then people don't get it. Whereas if we were to sell the same product to you in a way that makes you feel a certain level of status, it still does the good of benefiting from, say, compounding without me necessarily talking to you in compound interest terms, because I might even lose you, making you feel that you don't even know where to put your money and all that. So I suppose allowing us to be cognizant of our biases in the first place would really unravel a lot of solutions that suppose going forward can be very helpful in helping our clients. Yeah, so that is my position on this, and I'm quite positive about where the industry is heading now.
Thanks for that, Prince. And I think if I talk to the DNA, financial DNA guys in the US, they've got very much the same approach as what you are saying. And I know Yuri, which is on this call, will also agree that biases is just the way we look at the world, but it's important to be aware of it. But it's how we are wired. So it's the awareness is important, but and then thirdly, I think what is important, what you touch on is, as an individual, how do you look at, and what is your fears, and how do we address your fears, and not necessarily, the figures and the numbers and the technical terms is not that important for us as human beings, although most clients still come to us. And I think that's the paradox of the problem. I see it where I'm part of the no fee or the fee only movement, where despite advertising, that advice, and a lot of the clients that actually contact the website is that they still are product orientated. So most probably, and Brian Foster likes to say, most clients that come to us still come with a product problem in their own minds, but that is what they're putting forward. Actually, there's, to your point, another fear that's lying under the surface that we need to understand. And I think definitely, and Mel, in the article that was published in this month's personal finance, I think also pointed that out nicely, Mel. So great article. And also you made sure that a lot of us that's in the industry working towards financial coaching could give input to the article. And for those of you that didn't have a look at it, in this month's personal finance, a very nice article that was written around financial coaching and taking the client's needs into consideration and their preferences. Deepa, also welcome. Your thoughts on this object of unique human beings and different cultures and different views at financial planning. Any thoughts that you want to share with us?
Not at this moment, Hendrik.
Okay, fantastic. I want to just share a picture with you, and just to think a little bit and to start or delve a little bit further into the conversation, and I'm just going to put it up for us, is when I was thinking about it, to say, we most of us in this conversation are aware of this. However, how can we then, as financial coaches and as financial planners, what is the things that we can perhaps, what is a framework that we can perhaps look at in terms of this to better understand how our clients think around this, and how can we approach it to help facilitate these conversations with our clients? So this then, and I just want to let this jump over to the other screen. Else, I don't think you want to be looking at that, and then we should be fine. So I think the first thing is awareness. However, what we're talking about here is our clients have got unique personalities, and there's a huge discussion going on in terms of, is it personalities or is it traits that influence us deep down, our DNA, and then how we grew up. And Jasmine specifically touched on that, is to share, what is those things that how we grew up in terms of our families. Then we've got social practices that comes from the societies we grew up, what people think about us. I had a discussion I think it was 2 Fridays back. I was doing for quite a senior management group. I was in the financial service industry. I was doing a financial literacy session, and one of the senior people said, but when we talked about frugality, which is one of the driving blocks in terms of growing and sustaining financial wealth, he said, but if I'm frugal in my community, people will take me out. So it's expected of me that's having a senior position in a company, in society, to actually pay for social events, to take the bill if we having dinner, etc. So what is those social practices that influence our clients, and then cultural and historical narratives that influence us? The eldest or the youngest son must get the family business, or the youngest son must get the family home. Women must get one part, where boys must get 2 parts when they inherit in some cultures. How does that influence us in terms of our finances? And that's all driven by mood at the background of, how does that make me feel as a client? Because there's one thing of just having this cultural stories around us, but how does that make me feel? And from an ontological coaching perspective, we say mood is a predisposition for action. So that is going to influence the language I'm going to have, and how I'm going to think, and how I'm going to make decisions. And that's where our clients' concerns then come from, we can say, in terms of financial planning. If we go and look a little bit further, is then to say, however, all our clients actually want better financial wellness. And this is driven by the results. So the outcomes they get. However, outcomes is driven by communication and behavior, which is tools and techniques. And if we think about it, what Jasmine referred to, that's the level where we actually sit with the financial planning process, sits in that tools and techniques. It's also how our clients will engage in terms of how they budget, or not budget, because certain personalities will love budgeting, other won't. A lot of our clients don't want to budget because they it is for them something that they feel ashamed of, because they feel that they're not going to have enough money at the end of the month. However, that's then driven by the way of being or their attitude towards financial planning, which we can say is their structure of interpretation, or how they see the world. And that's then driven how we see the world, or our structure of interpretation. And that's also where things like Prince said biases sit, is because that's beliefs will influence how we are going to do things, and that will result in what we get. So if we work with our clients, we must be engaging with them to say, how do we change the structure of interpretation? How do we work then? And by working with it is things that we need to think about is the moods. Are they anxious about their finances, or are they excited about it? Are they in resignation in terms of that? Just taking Jasmine talked about black tax. I work with a lot of interns at a program that I'm part with, people that's just starting off, their first job, second jobs that they've got. all of a sudden everybody feel that they have got a job now. I contributed in some other way towards you, and the expectation is that they need to make a contribution towards those people. The young people want to make a contribution, but what is also ethical, the right amount that I need to make towards the people that looked after me and helped me to get into this first position. So how do I engage with that to be able to have a quality life of existence, but still contribute towards my community and what is culturally expected of me? And that sits firstly in a mood. Is there possibility in this, or am I moving to resignation? Do I see it as a resentment, or do I accept it? And then there's the other part of caring. How do I care about the people and South Africa, Ubuntu nation, and contributing to people, where on the other side, my mood will then engage in terms of what is the assertions, what is expected of socially from me, but also what is the beliefs in terms of biases, etc. How am I going to engage? And for us then as coaches and financial planners is then to say and help our clients to talk through these things so that they can engage differently in terms of seeing the world, making new declarations, making new requests, because requests from people is not necessarily that I need to say yes. It is I can renegotiate terms. So and at the old end of the day is what is best for our clients. And it's not for me as a financial coach to say what's best for my client. My client is the expert of their lives, and it's up to my client to construct the life that they want that will be appropriate in their context, but also creating the best life possible for them now as well as in the future. So how do I use these tools then from a coaching engagement so that I can help my client to create the best possible life? And then this simplistic model says to me is, how do we get shared understanding? So coordination of meaning for me as a financial coach, as well as a client, so that we can create and coordinate action for our clients to get to the desired outcomes my clients want, because they are the creators and the writers of the stories of their own future lives for themselves as well as their families. So how do we create a better life for our clients, their families, their extended families, and in this complex world of finances to make the best possible or create the best possible outcomes? And that was all I wanted to share in terms of a model, perhaps, to think about this and to give context to the conversation. So over to the and anybody can chip in, put on your camera, give your thoughts. I think I saw is a Deepa. Did you put up a hand there? You're more than welcome to chip in. And whoever from all financial planners, coaches online, you're also more than welcome to give your views on what we've just shared. Yes, Deepa.
I want to know, so it's more than just my view, it's more of a question to everybody here. What do you think is the connection between culture and country and what's this word now? It just slipped out of my head. Consumerism. And how does that affect the emotional quality of finance?
So I think consumerism is, nearly want to say it's a mood that is created by the world we live in, and that mood creates a language that we put to it. And I think Lynn Twist in her work around the soul of money gives a brilliant, and Prince, I love your input on this, gives a brilliant view that it's contributing to a view of scarcity, because what happens with consumerism is we end up that the world tell us we need to live in a certain house. The world tell us that we need to wear certain brands. The world tell us to engage with money with a certain way. The world tell us we can afford it because we can take out a loan. And we start to believe that world, and we become consumers and rather than citizens, where if we are citizens, we care about our communities and the world we live in, and we look differently. We explore questions like what is enough, instead of having this lifestyle creep that we just want more and more, and that we actually need a bigger salary, etc., which is all a mood of scarcity and a language of scarcity. But Prince, views on Deepa's question, perhaps from your side.
From my side, I think that first of all behaviors, given the context, are rational. It is just that as we keep on repeating such behaviors, it becomes counterintuitive. So a typical example, I usually like to say that in as much as I'm a very ardent critic of traditional finance and assuming people are rational, I also go back to say, in fact, all our starting points are from a point of rationality. If for example, I grew up in a poor home and I finally made it, I want to help other people out of, or my family members out of poverty. So I would assume that is a point of rationality. If I want to go and buy the most luxurious, say, car, for example, I might say, I've never in my life seen anyone in my family do that, and so I'm going to do it. So here, it's not just the need to just buy ostentatious goods, but a signal to my community that, look, I have succeeded. It's a representative that we can succeed. So subconsciously, we may be moving to making a rational decision in our heads, but it ends up being counterintuitive. And so what I usually say about these things is that just have a conversation with any individual. You would know no person, regardless of culture or race, wants to retire poor. No person wants to be dependent on another person. But unfortunately, sometimes with the society we find ourselves in, whether the type of community we grew up in, the types of families, there are lots of sociological and psychological factors at play that leads us to make certain financial decisions. So sometimes a group may be tagged with a certain social behavior, for example, but once you delve deeper, you would then be able to, for example, understand that, well, it is because of factor A, B, C that individual Y is behaving in this way. But if I were to sit and just talk about with that person, no jargons, no technical terms, just about life, nobody wants to retire poor. Everyone would like to build more wealth. So, and there's just a question on why there seems to be a certain taboo around money. And research that I recently stumbled upon, for example, says that as people start saving, their fear psychologically of death is minimized to a point that they are comfortable planning for their estate or their death. The problem is, some of our financial tools out there are not just financial tools, but psychological tools. So if we are able to get people to start thinking in that sense, then automatically, if I'm accumulating, let's say 500 rands a month, 2,000 a month, or whatever the amount may be, it is psychologically minimizing my fear of death. And if that happens, I'm more comfortable to start planning about when I'm not here. So if we start unraveling these and also looking at the products as not just financial products, but psychological products, we will end up solving, well, not most of, but at least some of the critical issues within all cultures without even having to touch on culture in itself, because the black parent would want to leave a legacy but doesn't want to talk about death. But if he is constantly putting monies into, say, Coronation or Andrea, whatever the investment may be, it starts something in your psyche which makes you a bit less afraid. And with that, we can actually solve the problem of not talking about death without ever touching on the concept of even culture. So I think where the industry is going again with the whole, more of the soft side of things, talking about the behavioral elements, we may end up solving some of the quote-unquote cultural issues without ever having to touch on it, because deep down, nobody wants to be poor, regardless of, again, race or culture. Nobody wants to, be dependent on another person. So with time and how we present our financial products, we may be able to unravel and solve some of these problems without ever having to touch on culture, because there are so many diversities that I don't think there would ever be one financial planner who would be able to understand all the cultural intricacies. But we all have a certain cultural relationships with money, for example, and a psychology that is universal, which may help us to solve some of these problems without us having to learn all the languages in South Africa, all the cultures in the country. So I'm quite positive and hopeful in that with time, as the industry is moving on, there will be quite a great change that would come.
Thanks for that, Prince. I totally agree. So it's the quality of conversations we're having with clients. Jasmine has got an interesting question there. She says, how do we, interesting is how things are done from a customary law perspective. Males inherits over females and has only been rectified as written last year. Despite this practice still exists, how do you convince and make your clients aware of the pitfalls without being culturally insensitive? Now, I must say interesting, under farming communities, I still pick it up a lot in terms of wills, especially where the daughters do not come back to the farm and is actually married, say, engineer that stays in the city, etc. And when I was a few years back, I would have a standard question I would ask Jasmine is, do you actually want your daughter-in-law to have a more luxurious life than your own daughter? But these days I would say, how is that serving you? And let the client think about it and come towards an answer from a coaching perspective. But I think definitely is, how do we do it? And I think to Prince's point is, how do we have conversations around this, which is non-judgmental, and that people actually think through what is the impact of how they are spending, how are they engaging, so that they can address the needs they've got now, but also make provision for their own futures and build sustainability, because I think everybody wants to create a legacy. And I think that's that thing is, in Everyday Heroes, it's referred to as, how do you create the paradox between creating a legacy but serving your community and people on a daily basis? Because I think that's the other thing. Sometimes we get so hooked up in terms of creating a legacy, where how are we serving ourselves and others in our daily lives, and having that paradox looked after. Deepa, thoughts there from your side? I see your hand is up. Johan, kom nou na jou toe.
Okay, so I see Prince is very strong on retirement and that issue. And so I just want to bring up a thought that I've noticed, not only in the South African context, but globally, is that people are constantly upgrading their lifestyle. So by that, I mean, we're moving from the urban indigenous areas to the cities. We're moving from the cheaper suburbs to the more expensive suburbs. And we're moving from the more expensive suburbs to emigrating to different countries. And then we find people in those countries also emigrating to more financially stable countries. And I think in the last 2 years, especially with the Ukrainian war, we see all these refugees crossing borders, and it's become a global issue now. How do these people, how do we, even in our context, cater for retirement when we hit retirement? Our number one focus is immigration.
I'm going to give a side remark on that one, and then Prince can also give a view on it. Deepa, my personal opinion is that we must actually ban the word retirement, especially for our younger generations, and rather work with financial freedom. Is to have, where's that target towards financial freedom? Because worldwide, if we look, there's a small percentage of people that can actually retire. And then I think we're moving more to multi-dimensional lives, where we'll have phases where we go through, and rather help clients through those, moving through those different stages, and supporting each other going through those different stages. I think that's, and I think then we are more flexible to deal with, it doesn't matter where I'm going to stay. It's more, who do I want to be, and where do I who do I want to become? So focusing more on who do I want to become, and actually that comes then back to the basis of money is just value that we exchange, and we get value exchange for the value that we create. And then it's the question is, how do I then deal with the money that flows through my life, and how is that impacting if I move to the bigger suburb, if I move to another country, whatever the case may be. And that becomes then a very important part for a financial advisor to be part of me, but also to help me through those transitions that I need to go through. Prince, any views there from your side on that?
Yes, yes, Hendrik, and I personally believe that all of us, to some level, suffer from this money script called money status, and because depending on, well, how we see life, on a level of say 1 to 100, we all lie somewhere along the continuum. But majority of us still believe that more money will bring us more happiness, and to the point, to an extent that even if we do not have the money, but we can show that we have it, it may also bring us some status. So again, the concept of money status comes in, and that's because we have all formed a certain relationship or perception with money that it has become detrimental. And every time anything is marketed to us on TV, it shows happiness. So we are wired to believe that any extra accumulation of whatever, the latest gadgets, the upgrading to a new home, everything that we see on TV, we see on the internet is pretty much telling us that more money will make us happy. And so once we start moving from having to being, as in being a human and enjoying that whole process and relationship of humanity with other people, there is more meaning to it. But it takes a while for us to really break that cycle of a very bad perception or conception with money. But of course, also businesses need to sell their products. So it's going to be a tug of war between businesses and then financial advisors and coaches in trying to reshape the narrative towards being. And once that happens, we're most likely going to see, even for black tax, for example, a lot of things may not really be solved with money, but even guidance. So if we start looking at our situation from the perspective where money will not solve our problems, or more money will not necessarily be a solution to our problems, we may start looking at alternatives. Spending more time with family, may be helpful than spending extra money on family. So a redefinition of ourselves from shifting from just having and just mindless accumulation into being and enjoying the whole process of being human, being kind to others. It would really be quite a helpful way to redefine our understanding of money.
I love that. And Prince, as you are talking, it let me think of that work that Sarah Newcomb from Morningstar did, in terms of saying that we actually don't have needs and wants. It's just psychological needs. And if we determine what is the psychological need what our customer wants actually to satisfy it, then the conversation is more strategy conversation than a spending conversation. Exactly what you are saying that. So true. Thanks for that, Prince. Johan, you've got something, and sorry for letting you wait so long. I think you're muted, most probably, Johan. We can't hear you, Johan. I see you unmuted, but yeah, no sound. We'll come back to you now, Johan. Jasmine, we had a lot of conversations. Any thoughts from your side?
No, I'm actually just taking everything in. Like I said, I came to the forum with more questions than answers. But I'm very invigorated by how everyone is engaging in the topic, because I think when we talk about culture and that, especially in a South African context, everyone gets very afraid. And so yeah, they get so afraid of it, and I think it's something that we need to talk about. We need to discuss. Because unfortunately there's not really a lot of representation. If you think about the majority of South African consumers are people of color, and it's also the majority of consumers that have low financial literacies, poor financial well-being, being people of color. So clearly there's something needs to be done about it, and these conversations need to be had, and I'm glad that we're finally having these conversations.
Thanks for that input, Jasmine. Deepa, over to you.
Sorry, hey, you see what happens when you invite me to talk. I ended up asking all these questions. So, Hendrik, another issue or question that I have is that we in South Africa come with the notion the harder you work, the more money you earn. And they even say this about us internationally, is that South Africans are very hardworking. We're willing to put in the longer hours. But do you concur with that statement? Do we have to be a slave to time in order to live financially free lives? Or are we just chasing that consumer cycle? You know, I see like internationally people like my own family, they enjoy, they live in humble means, but they travel and live grand lives. Whereas in South Africa, we live in grandness and we drive grandness, but our lives are in fact quite frugal and humble. So, what do you think is our notion here? Or do we have the right idea that we need to put in all those hours and be a slave to be financially free?
I think that's one of the lies we tell ourselves. So I think that's an ungrounded assessment we make. But and Alan Sealer actually refers to it as a worldwide mood of industriousness. We tell the story. We give ourselves a badge that we need to work so hard. And I'm actually the last person to can make a judgment about this, because I'm guilty of that one to a certain extent also. But the other important thing is just a side comment that I want to say on this one is it's interesting that both time and money is something that humans created, and both of them, is to your point that you just made, is in my mind is actually a mindset of not having enough. So we haven't got enough time, we haven't got enough money, and that's the lie that we're telling ourselves. So how do we reframe it so that we can have another attitude towards money as well as time? So that's the question I put back to you, and yeah, I love whoever wants to say something on that is more than welcome to chip in.
Mendel, can I maybe just
yes, please, Yuri.
There's a book written by Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez. It's called Your Money or Your Life, and I mean it talks exactly to what we've been talking about here. Now, I think we all calibrated differently in terms of what you want out of life and on what you consider to be a happy life, then, if I can use that term. And they give a very useful frame of a process that you go through on an individual basis to decide what it is that you enjoy putting your life energy into. Because I mean that's what they're reframing this whole process of where you're building capital as a venture where you take your life energy and you offer that in return of some payment. And do you enjoy doing that? And I mean, that's a very important thing, obviously, to have clarity about. And I think as financial planners, well, first of all, you need to, if you're a financial planner, you need to have thought about that yourself, but hopefully that's also a contribution that you can make in the lives of the people that cross your path. It talks a lot to, a lot of the points that have been made here, not buying into the consumerist mindset, and in that way, really achieving financial independence. And interesting, they also define financial independence not in terms of a rand amount or a dollar amount, but financial independence in terms of mindset. Yeah, so just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Yuri. And I think that's such an important one, because that also speaks to that, to your point, to the enough question, and how do you add value to the world? Because I think by adding your value to the world and following your passion, also research shows us that those people are also more likely to become millionaires and sustain financial wealth, because you're actually following your passion. And it's also easier then to answer the enough question, because there's you got to a point where you're comfortable with what you have. You are comfortable with what you can give to the world, and it's no longer about chasing just the moolah, So
yeah.
Thanks for that, Prince.
Yes, I agree with you on that. But again, it's because of what we are repeatedly told what success looks like. Because I'm yet to see that motivational speaker who doesn't talk about putting in the extra hours, working hard, and not always relating it to money, or some kind of achievement, some promotion, and whatever the case may be. But what we never get to hear is the opportunity cost to all these, which allows one to then balance it out. Do you want to put in that extra hours to the detriment of family? And I suppose if we have that discussion, it will allow people to now see exactly where they fit in that continuum of wanting to work all the hours and making all the money, or maybe balancing it out. Because whichever option you choose, there's going to be an opportunity cost. And again, I've heard quite a few people talk about or say what they wish they had done on their deathbeds, and you never hear the one say, I wish I had that one extra promotion, or I wish I had that, one, if I had knocked $1 million, or whatever the case may be. It's always about possibly having to spend time with family and stuff. So we don't get the conversations of the opportunity cost of constantly chasing, and it's only when it's too late. Because maybe if we ever hear that one person who on his deathbed said, I wish I had just accumulated an extra $1 million, then it would allow us to really start really looking at life and what matters most. And I think once we are able to cover our needs and a bit more, we may want to ask, do you want to sacrifice relationships and family for extra amounts of rands, for example? And would it be what you would on your deathbed say you wish you had, would you be at the point where you can say, I did what I could and I'm happy? Or getting to the point of regret, and when you would have no other option but to just possibly say sorry? So I suppose if we have that conversation, it might help us to reorient ourselves in how we accumulate wealth and how we spend time with people that matter to us.
No, that's so true, Prince. So yeah, I'm got a sense of time. It feels like we just had a 10-minute conversation. This was such a nice conversation. So firstly, to our guests, Prince, Jasmine, and Deepa, thanks for joining us. And I think this was a brilliant conversation. If I also look at the chats, so relevant to us and what we do every day and engage with clients every day. So thanks for your time and being part of the panel and the discussion. And then also for each of you that joined in for the conversation, we appreciate your contribution and being part of the conversation this afternoon. So thanks them all for being part of the conversation, and all of the best until we meet next month again for a conversation, and really appreciate your engagement. So thank you very much.